Very much, Mr. Speaker. It's with pleasure that I rise to speak in support of this, the 2010 Regulatory Improvement Bill. Why? Because it is very much a common sense piece of legislation. Now let me tell you why I like this bill, and then I'll tell you how it came about. The reason this is so good is because it provides a framework for the process of continuous legislative improvement. It makes it easier to get things done, it makes it easier to do business, easier to make regulatory change, easier to make legislative change in areas that affect everyday lives of hard-working New Zealanders. It's an example of one of many pieces of legislative innovation that Labour championed and brought to this House, because as we all know, the first reading, this was brought to the House by the Honourable Leanne Dalzell. Amazing, really. We're doing it under urgency about 2 years after it was first brought to the House, but that's okay, at least it's coming in. So let's give credit, Sam, where credit is due. And I certainly know there'll be many businesses out there that understand what this legislation represents. As the former Minister of Commerce and the instigator of the process, the Honourable Leanne Dalzell said in one of her speeches in the House on this legislation, it is really important that we have regular opportunity as a Parliament to tidy up those issues that are not perhaps insignificant enough to make it into the statute's amendment bill, but not significant enough to warrant a bill on their own right. Although it is fair to say that the amendments contained in the Regulatory Improvement Bill are not particularly dramatic, the bill itself is another deliverable of the Quality Regulation Review. Now that's from Leanne Dalzell, and she did a fantastic job in bringing this here and also chairing the select committee that has brought it to the House as well. So congratulations to her. And that's the reason why I like this bill. It makes progress. It's positive. It represents the outcome of a plan that resulted from consultation. It's good legislation. Now let me tell the House how this bill came about, because it is a very good example of how to do things properly, about how to make a difference in a way that is truly measurable and informed and representatives of the wishes of the core constituency, our employers, the people of New Zealand. So let's start at the beginning, Mr. Speaker. As I've already mentioned, hats off to the Honourable Leanne Dalzell. Why? The Quality Regulations Review undertaken by former Minister Dalzell addressed regulatory barriers to business growth. And we all know that the Labour Party is the party of business, and this is just another example of how the Labour Party goes out there and talks to businesses and then implements the sort of legislation that businesses want. We're for the many, not the few. For the many businesses, not the few. We all know that. It was a broad review, Mr. Speaker, that looked at anomalies, inconsistency and duplication across the government's regulatory framework. As well as correcting errors, the review aimed to develop ways of ensuring new rules were efficient from a business perspective. The review established that when businesses deal with the government, they don't see discrete agencies like the IRD, ACC, OSH, rather they see a single entity, the government. Accordingly, businesses were frustrated by having to provide the same information over and over again to different agencies. The Quality Regulations Review actually confirmed that New Zealand's regulatory environment is generally in good shape. And of course it would be in good shape. There was about 8 years of a Labour government before this came into place to get this stuff sorted out that had been put into such disrepair by the Bolger government. So after 8 years, it was in pretty good shape. New Zealand consistently ranked highly in the World Bank's Doing Business Index. In fact, the 2010 Global Survey found that New Zealand is the second easiest country in which to do business, and I think we can thank the Labour government for that. Adding to the positive reputation as a business partner that New Zealand enjoys, we consistently rank highly under Transparency International's Corruption's Perception Index, first in 2009 and first equal many times before. Business was closely involved in the review process, Mr. Speaker. Business networks, for example, Chambers of Commerce, Business New Zealand, New Zealand Council of Trade Unions and industry associations have acted as a conduit for business input to the review. In fact, 130 individual businesses in the 4 sectors were interviewed about what they see as priorities and issues. The Minister heard from focus groups. Imagine that. Imagine setting up a focus group and actually talking to people. It's a novel approach, Mr. Speaker, from members on that side of the House, but Labor did it the whole time during the 9 years. She set up these focus groups nationwide, and we have received submissions from individual businesses through the business consultation website. It was a very involved, a very consultative process. It wasn't done under urgency, it was done in good time under proper procedure. So what did Labor and Leanne Dalzell, what they did is they looked at the regulatory framework, how the new regulations were made from a business perspective. As well as introducing this bill, the regulatory impact analysis regime was strengthened to ensure that future regulation properly identified the problem and looked at all options for resolving it. So once again, what the Labor Party did, what Leanne Dalzell did and the Labor government did, is they actually went out and they talked to people. They talked to people who are affected by this sort of legislation. And this is why this is such a good piece of legislation. Now, here is an example, Mr. Speaker, of a hard-working minister that goes out and she listens to people, hears the people, and then acts upon their recommendations. And I think Leanne Dalzell, this bill, as we know, it's gone through all the proper processes. The fact it's going through under urgency is probably unfair, because this was a long and involved process. In fact, it should have been passed a year ago. But anyway, here we are. But that's what Labor does, and Leanne Dalzell epitomises this work ethic. No sitting behind her desk, Sam, but travelling the country, talking to people and businesses, and only then coming up with legislation that really makes a difference. The changes proposed in this bill, Mr. Speaker, cover a wide range of policy areas and legislation, but they are all aimed at improving regulatory frameworks and reducing the compliance burden on business. Thank you, Leanne Dalzell. To tell the truth, Mr. Speaker, and I don't mean to be disrespectful here at all, but I just can't see Rodney Hyde or Simon Power doing this. This bill wouldn't be before the House if Messrs Hyde and Power were in charge, because I simply cannot see them getting in their cars and travelling from Cape Reinga to the Bluff, consulting and talking. I can't... Yeah, you did, right. 2 or 3 cars, a cavalcade. But they wouldn't be talking to people because they'd need all the cameras and everything for the smile and wave photo ops. This was serious business of government. I can't see that. I couldn't see Mr Hyde doing that, Mr Speaker. And this is why this is a Labor bill, because that's how we operate. We travel the country listening. We sometimes get criticised for getting out there and talking to Kiwis up and down this wonderful country.
Point of order, Charles Chauvel.
Sorry to interrupt my friend Mr Nash, but I just wonder if you would mind reminding Mr Lotoainga of Speaker's ruling 8/4, which requires members not to refer to what is happening in the gallery. That is out of order, and the member's done it at least twice.
Can I say to the member that the ruling talks about speakers. The member was interjecting, so he's not necessarily a speaker. Can I say, excuse me, I'm ruling here. Can I have some quiet, please? The second thing is that I have been a little bit concerned about the nature of the debate, and that the interjections are being responded to and we're getting a cross-flow. So, and also people are referring to each other by the first name. Now, I could have taken a point of order and straightened it out, but I was just hoping to let the speech flow and we can get on with the business of the House. But having had the interruption, we won't refer to people in the gallery, we won't refer to people by first names, and we'll speak to this very interesting piece of legislation which we're all seized with, the Regulatory Improvement Bill. I invite Stuart Nash to continue.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much. And as I was saying, that we are public servants, we're employed to represent the will of the people, so why wouldn't MPs get out there? What I'm doing at the moment is I'm talking about the process of this bill, how it came about and why it's such a good piece of legislation. And what I was saying, the reason why this is such a good piece of legislation is we got out and we talked to people, we talked to businesses up and down the country. Well, Leanne Dalzell did. She sought feedback from wherever it was given, and as a consequence has come up with a very, very good piece of legislation. And I suppose that's evidenced by the fact that everyone in this House is supporting it. Back to this bill, Mr Speaker. It is an omnibus bill that makes amendments to 9 pieces of legislation with the object of improving the regulatory framework and reducing compliance burden on business. And as I was saying, Mr Speaker, everyone knows that the Labor Party is actually the true party of business, because the Labor Party is the only party that has brought a bill here that actually reduces the compliance burden on business, and they will be very thankful for this bill. The